Anastas Mikoyan's path in the corridors of power began back when the country was just getting back on its feet after the revolution and civil war. Anastas Ivanovich began his work in the government under Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, holding the post of People's Commissar, or Minister of Trade and Supply. He witnessed and participated in the very first steps of the new state, when many ideas were just taking shape and the country was searching for its path. From the 1920s until 1965, Mikoyan continuously held high government positions. This is a colossal period of more than 40 years of active political activity. During this time, several generations of leaders changed, ideological doctrines changed, and events took place that turned the whole world upside down. Let us recall, for example, the period from 1935 to 1966, when Anastas Ivanovich was a permanent member of the Politburo and then the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This was not just a high-ranking position, it was the center of all key decision-making in the country. Imagine how many people came and went from this highest authority. How many lives were broken, how many careers were cut short. The Great Terror of 1937 to 1938 wiped out almost the entire old guard, many of Lenin's comrades, and even those who replaced them. But Mikoyan remained. Then the Great Patriotic War broke out, and as a member of the State Defense Committee, he oversaw the most important issues of supplying the front and the rear. After the war came new trials, the struggle for power after Stalin's death, Khrushchev's thaw, and finally, Khrushchev's own removal from power. At each of these turning points in history, Mikoyan found his place, retained his influence, and, most importantly, his life. It was like an experienced captain steering a ship through the fiercest storms without losing course and keeping his crew safe. Such a long tenure at the helm gave him unique experience that was inaccessible to most. He was the keeper of the collective memory of the Politburo, a witness to many mistakes and successes, and personally knew all the key players for decades. This made him a figure whose opinion was listened to, even if not always agreed with. After all, who else but him could tell how a particular idea had already been implemented 20 years ago and what results it had led to? He was a living archive, invaluable to any new government seeking to avoid past mistakes or repeat past successes. How did he manage it? The secret lay in his remarkable ability to adapt politically. He was a true master of maneuvering, a virtuoso of behind-the-scenes games, where every word and every gesture could cost lives. Unlike many of his colleagues, who were too eager to join one or another intra-party faction, whether Trotskyists, Zinovievists, Bukharinists, or later the anti-party group of Molotov, Malenkov and Kaganovich, Mikoyan preferred to stay out of open confrontations. He was never one to lead the opposition or sharply criticize the current course while it was dominant. His voice was not among those who dared to challenge the leader at first. This was not cowardice, but rather calculated caution, a deep understanding of the mechanics of power in a totalitarian state. He knew that those who showed their cards too early risked everything. His actions were not dictated by ideological loyalty to any particular line. Rather, it was a deep instinct for self-preservation combined with an analytical mind. He knew how to read between the lines of party documents, pick up on nuances in leaders' speeches, and understand the balance of power from subtle signs. Who was having lunch with whom? Who was supporting whom at meetings? Whose articles appeared more often in the central press? In an atmosphere of constant suspicion and hidden struggle, where any wrong word could be interpreted as a conspiracy, such insight was a matter of life and death. And Mikoyan did not just survive, he thrived, maintaining his authority and influence. Instead, Anastas Ivanovich possessed a rare gift of foresight, a political instinct that allowed him to sense which way the wind was blowing. When the struggle for power reached its climax and it became clear which side was winning, Mikoyan was one of the first, but always at the right moment, to come to the aid of the victor. This could take the form of public support, skillful argumentation, mobilization of his supporters, or simply tactful silence at the right moment, followed by active involvement in the new team. Imagine that you are in a room where the fate of the country is being decided. The tension is palpable, and every sentence could be the last. Some argue fiercely, others remain silent, trying to figure out which side to take. And Mikoyan, perhaps, sits slightly apart, observing, analyzing. And when the scales tip in a certain direction, his voice is heard. His support proves decisive, or at least very influential. This was not pure hypocrisy, it was pragmatism of the highest order. He understood that in order to maintain his position and ability to influence processes, it was necessary to be part of the existing system, not to stand against it. This strategy allowed him to avoid direct conflicts, which inevitably led to repression and oblivion. In a situation where political opponents did not simply lose elections but disappeared, this was the only way to survive. His ability to navigate politics with such finesse was truly unique and ensured his long tenure in the highest echelons of power, regardless of who was sitting in the head of state's chair. It was reminiscent of the virtuoso play of a grandmaster who always anticipates his opponent's moves and finds a way to victory even in the most difficult games. As one of his contemporaries who had observed him for many years said, Mikoyan did not change his convictions. He changed the wind so that his sails were always full. However, to understand the full depth of his art of survival, one must look into the darkest pages of his biography, into those moments when the price for a place in the Politburo was measured not only in political influence, but also in human lives. During the Great Terror, when the machinery of repression was working non-stop, Mikoyan's signature, like that of other members of the top leadership, was on the so-called execution lists. It was a monstrous mechanism of collective responsibility created by Stalin to bind everyone together in blood. Refusal to sign was tantamount to suicide. It would have been an immediate ticket to the same cell where those whose names were on the lists were sent. For Mikoyan, it was a terrible dilemma. On the one hand, there were the lives of thousands of people, many of whom he knew. On the other, there was his own life, the lives of his family, and, as he probably believed, the opportunity to continue his work for the good of the country in areas where he was truly effective. He chose life. It was a pragmatic, cynical, and, from a humanistic point of view, appalling choice. But it was this choice that allowed him to survive those years. He was not an ideological fanatic of terror, like Yezhov, for example. He was a systemic player who accepted the rules of the game, no matter how bloody they were. He understood that the system created by Stalin did not tolerate individual moral qualms. Either you were part of the mechanism, or the mechanism crushed you. And he became part of it, while maintaining a certain inner distance, which later allowed him to become one of the architects of de-Stalinization. But Mikoyan's survival was ensured not only by his ability to maneuver and compromise with his conscience. He possessed another invaluable quality. He was extremely useful. Unlike many party officials, who were only good at ideological debates and office politics, Mikoyan was a man of action, a real manager. For decades, his main areas of activity were foreign and domestic trade, food, and light industry. These were areas that directly affected the lives of every person in the country. In 1936, even before the peak of the repressions, Stalin sent him on a long business trip to the United States of America. It was not just a tourist trip. Mikoyan was supposed to study American experience in the food industry and trade and transfer the best practices to the Soviet Union. He returned full of ideas. It was thanks to this trip that industrial ice cream production appeared in the Soviet Union, which he personally supervised, demanding that it be affordable and of high quality. The famous Mikoyan ice cream in waffle cones became one of the symbols of the Soviet era. He brought back technologies for the mass production of canned food, juices, mayonnaise, and champagne. He promoted the idea of universal shops with fixed prices, canteens and cafes to make life easier for Soviet citizens. Even such a seemingly trivial thing as a cutlet in a bun, the prototype of the modern hamburger, was his idea, borrowed from America. He believed that hot and cheap food should be available to workers right at the production site, and Stalin appreciated this. The leader understood that ideology alone would not feed the people. He needed someone who could feed the country, establish supplies, and organize the production of consumer goods. Mikoyan was just such a person. His practical usefulness was his main asset. While others fought for ideological purity, he fought to get a new variety of sausage or condensed milk on the shelves. And in the eyes of Stalin, who valued results above all else, this made Mikoyan indispensable. He was not just a politician, he was the chief supplier of a huge country, and removing him would have created a huge hole in the management system. After Stalin's death in March 1953, the moment of truth arrived. Power hung in the balance, and the leader's old comrades began a fierce struggle. The main contenders were Lavrenti Beria, Georgy Malenkov, and Nikita Khrushchev. It was a deadly game, where the stakes were higher than just careers. Beria, who controlled the state security agencies, seemed to be the strongest player. And here, Mikoyan once again demonstrated his unique intuition. He understood that Beria, with his enormous power and dark past, posed a threat to everyone else. He did not wait, but was one of the first to join the coalition of Khrushchev and Malenkov against the all-powerful head of the NKVD. His support was extremely important. As the oldest member of the Politburo, he had enormous authority. His words at that very meeting of the Presidium of the Central Committee in June 1953, where Beria was arrested, gave legitimacy to this risky move. He did not simply agree with Khrushchev, he sharply criticized Beria, accusing him of careerism and attempting to usurp power. It was a calculated risk, but it paid off handsomely. Beria's removal paved the way for change, and Mikoyan found himself on the winning side. But his role was not limited to simply supporting Khrushchev. He became one of the main ideologists and driving forces behind the process of de-Stalinization. At the famous 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1956, even before Khrushchev's famous secret report, Mikoyan delivered his own speech, which was very bold for the time. He spoke openly about the existence of a cult of personality, the need to rehabilitate those who had been wrongfully convicted, and the need to review Stalin's foreign policy. He was the first among the top leadership to dare to say publicly what many were only whispering about behind the scenes. This speech paved the way for Khrushchev's report and showed that there were forces within the Politburo ready for change. For Mikoyan, this was not just a political move. It was probably also an attempt to clear his conscience for his participation in the repressions. He actively joined the rehabilitation commissions, helping to restore the good names of thousands of people. Of course, there was a lot of political calculation involved. By condemning Stalin, he and his comrades absolved themselves of some of the responsibility for the past, shifting it onto the deceased leader. But it cannot be denied that Mikoyan was one of the most consistent supporters of the thaw. He supported the publication of works criticizing the Stalinist regime and advocated for greater openness in culture and science. His loyalty to the new course was put to the test in June 1957. At that time, the old Stalinist guard, Molotov, Malenkov, Kaganovich, and others, attempted to remove Khrushchev. They formed a majority in the Presidium of the Central Committee and effectively removed him from power. At this critical moment, when all seemed lost, Mikoyan firmly sided with Khrushchev. Together with several other members of the leadership, he insisted on convening a plenary session of the Central Committee, where Khrushchev had more supporters. It was a bold and risky move, which ultimately led to the defeat of the anti-party group and the consolidation of Khrushchev's power. Mikoyan had once again backed the right horse and won. But his talents were not limited to domestic politics. During the Khrushchev era, he became the country's chief diplomat and crisis manager. He was sent to the hottest spots and the most difficult negotiations. When the uprising broke out in Hungary in 1956, it was Mikoyan, together with Suslov, who flew to Budapest in an attempt to find a political solution and avoid bloodshed. When a rally of workers protesting against price increases was shot at in Novocherkassk in 1962, it was Mikoyan whom Khrushchev sent there to calm the population and assess the situation. These were dirty, thankless missions, but they showed the degree of trust Khrushchev had in him. The climax of his diplomatic career was the Caribbean crisis in the autumn of 1962. The world was on the brink of nuclear war. When Khrushchev and Kennedy agreed at the last minute to withdraw Soviet missiles from Cuba in exchange for a US non-aggression guarantee, a new problem arose. Fidel Castro, the leader of the Cuban Revolution, was furious. He felt betrayed and humiliated, believing that his opinion had been disregarded. He refused to allow UN inspectors onto the island, which jeopardized the entire deal. It was at this moment that Khrushchev sent his most experienced and cunning negotiator, Anastas Mikoyan, to Cuba. His mission was almost impossible: to calm the enraged Castro, convince him to accept the terms of the agreement, and save the world from catastrophe. The negotiations were incredibly difficult and lasted almost a month. Mikoyan showed remarkable restraint, tact, and diplomatic skill. He talked with Castro for hours, listened to his angry tirades, patiently explained Moscow's position, sometimes yielding, sometimes standing his ground. This mission was overshadowed by personal tragedy. In the midst of negotiations, he received a telegram from Moscow informing him of the death of his wife, Ashken. He was devastated, but did not interrupt the mission. Hiding his grief, he continued his work, understanding that the fate of the whole world was at stake. Only after the main negotiations were completed did he allow himself a few hours of solitude. In the end, he managed to find a compromise. Castro, albeit reluctantly, agreed to the main provisions, and the crisis was resolved. It was a triumph for Soviet diplomacy and a personal triumph for Mikoyan. However, even such a figure was not eternal. When, in October 1964, a conspiracy led by Brezhnev and Suslov against Khrushchev came to fruition, Mikoyan found himself in a difficult situation. He was not an active participant in the conspiracy. Moreover, he was one of the few who tried to defend Khrushchev at the Presidium meeting, proposing not to remove him from all posts, but only to limit his power. But he saw that the majority had already made their decision. And once again, his instinct for self-preservation kicked in. Realizing that resistance was futile, he submitted to the will of the majority. The new authorities rewarded him for his moderate stance. He was not sent into exile like Khrushchev. On the contrary, he was entrusted with the high, but purely ceremonial post of chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the formal head of state. It was an honorable departure, a golden parachute. He remained in this position for just over a year, and in 1965 retired for health reasons. He left quietly, without scandal, retaining all his honors and privileges. He was the last of the old guard to leave the political scene, not as a result of repression or disgrace, but of his own free will. It was then that the famous joke was born, which best characterizes his career. Anastas Mikoyan, from Ilyich to Ilyich, without a heart attack or paralysis. From Vladimir Ilyich Lenin to Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev. This phrase is the quintessence of his political destiny. He was a witness to and participant in the entire history of the Soviet Union, from its inception to the era of stagnation. What is the main secret of this phenomenon? Probably a unique combination of qualities. He was a pragmatist to the core, for whom results were always more important than ideological dogmas. He had an animal instinct for danger and knew how to change course in time. He was an irreplaceable specialist in his field, which made him valuable to any leader. Finally, he possessed iron self-control and the ability to negotiate, whether with an angry Stalin, a stubborn Castro, or his own colleagues in the Politburo. He is an ambiguous figure. He was both a creator who gave the country entire industries and an accomplice to terrible crimes. But his story is not just the biography of one man. It is a mirror reflecting the entire complex, tragic, and great era that he not only lived through, but also shaped in many ways. He was the cog in the state machine that proved stronger than the machine itself, outliving all its designers and mechanics. To fully appreciate the scale of his political survival, it is worth returning to the very beginnings of his career, to the fiery years of the Civil War. His name is inextricably linked with the tragic story of the 26 Baku Commissars. In 1918, amid the chaos of a collapsing empire, Mikoyan was one of the leaders of the Baku Commune. When the Commune fell, its leaders were arrested and sentenced to death by firing squad. Almost all of them died. Mikoyan, however, was among the few who miraculously escaped death. This early, almost mystical experience of survival, when he literally looked death in the eye and remained unharmed, seems to have tempered his character and instilled in him for life that very sixth sense that unerringly told him where mortal danger lay and where the path to salvation lay. It was in those Caucasian battles that he became close to other future titans of Soviet politics, Stalin, Orjonikidze, and Beria. This Caucasian clan, bound by a shared past, was for a long time one of the most influential forces in the Kremlin, and Mikoyan, as an integral part of it, enjoyed a certain degree of protection, especially in the early stages of his Moscow career. His ability to be useful was evident not only in global projects, but also in small things that shaped the daily lives of millions. Take, for example, the famous Book of Tasty and Healthy Food, of which he was one of the ideological inspirers and curators. It was not just a collection of recipes, it was a powerful ideological tool designed to shape a new Soviet culture of everyday life. The book taught hygiene, rational nutrition, and time management to Soviet women, whom the party wanted to see not only at the stove, but also at the machine. The recipes were standardized and designed for affordable products produced by Soviet industry, which was supervised by Mikoyan himself. In this way, he created a closed cycle. He organized the production of food products and then, through the book, taught how to consume them correctly and ideologically correctly. It was a subtle but very effective way of controlling society, which went far beyond simple administration. He did not just feed the country, he shaped its tastes and habits, creating a unified gastronomic space from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. His relationship with Stalin was a separate, extremely complex part of his life. He was not among the leader's closest friends, like Voroshilov or Molotov, but Stalin valued him for his business acumen and sharp mind. However, this did not make him invulnerable. On the contrary, he was constantly walking on a knife edge. This became particularly noticeable in the last years of Stalin's life, when the leader's paranoia reached its peak. Mikoyan recalled how, during nightly feasts at the dacha in Kuntsevo, Stalin would suddenly ask him a tricky question about Armenian history or economics, testing his loyalty and competence. Any mistake, any hesitation could be interpreted as treason. At the 19th Party Congress in 1952, Stalin launched a sharp, scathing attack on his oldest comrades in arms, Molotov and Mikoyan. He accused them of taking wrong positions and of capitulation. For everyone present, it was a clear signal. The old guard had fallen out of favor, and dark clouds were gathering over their heads. Many were convinced that Mikoyan's days were numbered, and that he would suffer the same fate as many other repressed leaders. Only Stalin's sudden death in March 1953 interrupted this scenario and, without exaggeration, saved Mikoyan's life. This episode clearly shows that his survival was not smooth and cloudless. It was a constant, exhausting struggle where every day could be his last. His diplomatic talent manifested itself long before the Caribbean crisis. During the Great Patriotic War, he was a key figure in negotiations with the Allies on Lend-Lease supplies. It was Mikoyan, as People's Commissar for Foreign Trade, who conducted the most difficult dialogues with American and British representatives, such as Averell Harriman and Lord Beaverbrook. He knew how to be tough when it came to the interests of the country, securing the necessary supplies of food, equipment, and materials. But at the same time, he could be charming and flexible, finding common ground with Western capitalists, whom Soviet propaganda portrayed as class enemies. He understood their mentality, their business approach, and spoke to them in the same language, the language of numbers, contracts, and mutual benefit. This work required not only economic knowledge, but also enormous tact and the ability to smooth over the rough patches that arose from mutual distrust between allies. He was the bridge over which thousands of tons of vital cargo passed into the Soviet Union, bringing victory closer. During the Khrushchev era, his role changed somewhat. While under Stalin, he was primarily a brilliant executor, under Khrushchev, he also became an experienced advisor, a kind of voice of reason to an impulsive and often unpredictable leader. Khrushchev was a man of extremes. He could become enthusiastic about an idea, such as the widespread introduction of corn, and demand its immediate implementation, regardless of reality. Mikoyan, with his pragmatic mindset and vast experience, often tried to ground these initiatives, to give them more realistic forms, to point out the possible risks. He did not argue with Khrushchev openly, understanding his explosive character, but he knew how to gently and unobtrusively correct his course. For example, when Khrushchev, inspired by successes in space, declared the imminent establishment of communism, Mikoyan emphasized more down-to-earth issues in his speeches: the need to improve the quality of goods, develop the service sector, and improve people's lives. He was the counterweight that prevented the state ship from veering too sharply off course. His diplomatic missions during the Khrushchev era were not limited to Cuba. He traveled halfway around the world, establishing relations with countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that had just gained independence from colonial rule. He negotiated with Indian leader Jawaharlal Nehru, Indonesian President Sukarno, and Egyptian Gamal Abdel Nasser. On these trips, he was not just an official, but the face of the new Soviet Union, more open, ready for dialogue, offering economic assistance without ideological dictates. He knew how to approach different cultures and showed respect for national traditions, which set him apart from many more straightforward Soviet officials. It was a delicate task to expand the Soviet sphere of influence, and Mikoyan performed it with his characteristic skill. As for his personal qualities, his contemporaries noted his wit and self-irony, which was a rarity in the upper echelons of power. He was a master of political anecdotes and could tell sharp jokes in a small circle, including about himself. This ability not to take himself too seriously was probably also part of his defense mechanism. He did not seek the role of leader, nor did he try to create a cult of personality around himself. His ambitions were more those of a chief manager than a supreme ruler. He wanted to be at the helm, but not necessarily on the captain's bridge. This position made him less dangerous in the eyes of leaders, whether Stalin or Khrushchev. They saw him not as a competitor, but as an indispensable assistant, a fixer who could handle any task, no matter how difficult. And as long as he was useful, he was safe. Ultimately, the story of Anastas Mikoyan is a story of how a person's personal qualities can perfectly match the demands of the era. In a different time, in a different political system, he might have become a successful businessman or diplomat. But fate threw him into the millstones of Soviet history, and he not only survived them, but also learned to control their movement. His longevity in power is not a coincidence or a miracle, but the result of daily, painstaking, and deadly dangerous work of the mind, will, and intuition. He was the living embodiment of the principle, adapt to survive, and survive to act. And in this, he undoubtedly succeeded like no other. Interestingly, his unique ability to survive was underpinned not only by political flexibility, but also by a deep understanding of human psychology, especially the psychology of a tyrant. He intuitively sensed Stalin's red lines, knew when to take the initiative, and when it was better to blend into the background. There is a story that illustrates this. Once, during another late-night dinner, Stalin angrily snapped at Mikoyan. What do you think, Anastas? Do you think I don't know what kind of person you are? You are the most cunning of us all. In such a situation, anyone else would have considered this a death sentence. But Mikoyan, without batting an eye, calmly replied something like, "Thank you for the compliment, Comrade Stalin. In our line of work, you can't do without cunning." He managed to turn the accusation into praise, and the potential threat into confirmation of his usefulness. This ability to defuse aggression and find unconventional ways out of critical situations was his trademark. His role as chief supplier had another, less obvious side to it. By controlling the flow of goods and trade, he possessed a vast amount of information about the real state of affairs in the country. Unlike many party ideologues who lived in a world of slogans and plans, Mikoyan saw the picture through the prism of shortages, market prices, and the mood in the queues. He knew where there was a shortage of bread, where discontent was brewing due to a lack of soap, and where, on the contrary, production had been successfully established and people's lives improved. This information was invaluable, and he skillfully dosed it out when reporting to the leadership. He could smooth over rough patches, or conversely, use facts about the looming food crisis to promote his decisions. Thus, he was not just an executor, but an important link in the feedback system, which made him indispensable to any leader who wanted to keep his finger on the pulse of the country. An important factor in his stability was his nationality. Being Armenian, he was, on the one hand, always something of an outsider in the predominantly Slavic leadership. This prevented him from claiming the absolute leading role, which made him less of a threat to Stalin and later to Khrushchev. On the other hand, he was the unofficial patron and protector of the Armenian SSR. He used his influence in Moscow to lobby for the interests of his small homeland, securing funds for the construction of factories and the development of science and culture. For example, it was thanks to his intercession that the unique Matenadaran Institute of Ancient Manuscripts in Yerevan was preserved and developed. This role made him not just a Moscow minister, but a national hero for an entire people, which gave him a solid rear and additional support, independent of Kremlin intrigues. After retiring, Mikoyan did not disappear into oblivion. He settled in a state dacha and began writing his memoirs, which were published under the title, "That's How It Was." This was his last and, perhaps, most important act of political struggle, the struggle for his own place in history. The book is written with extreme caution. He describes in detail his successes in establishing industry and diplomatic missions, but avoids the most sensitive issues, especially his participation in the repressions of the 1930s. He presents himself as a technocrat, a manager who always tried to act in the best interests of the country in the circumstances. These memoirs are not so much a confession as a carefully constructed version of events, a last attempt to edit his biography and present to posterity the image he himself would like to leave behind. Even in retirement, he continued to play the same game he had played all his life, the game of survival, only now in historical memory. It is worth noting his personal modesty, even asceticism in everyday life, which contrasted sharply with the habits of many party bigwigs. He was not known for his passion for luxury and did not build himself lavish palaces. His main passion was his work. This trait also contributed to his image as a man of action, far removed from arrogance and corruption, which earned him the respect of even his political opponents. In a system where the moral decay of the elite was one of the hidden problems, his reputation as an effective and relatively honest manager was an additional trump card. Finally, his uniqueness lay in the fact that he was one of the few in the top leadership who was not afraid of the Western world and tried not only to resist it, but also to learn from it. His trips to the United States were not just inspections. He studied the American system of management, logistics, and marketing, words that were considered almost swear words in the USSR, with genuine interest. He tried to transfer not only technology, but also principles of labor organization to Soviet soil, understanding that without this, it would be impossible to catch up with and overtake America, as the party demanded. This openness to new ideas and willingness to learn from the ideological enemy made him a figure who looked to the future rather than clinging to the past, which allowed him to remain relevant for so many decades. His pragmatism extended far beyond the food industry. Few remember that it was Mikoyan who, in 1939, was the key figure in concluding a trade and credit agreement with Nazi Germany, which preceded the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. For him, economic benefits and obtaining critically important German technologies for Soviet industry were more important than ideological barriers. During the war years, his organizational genius came to the fore. He was responsible not only for Lend-Lease, but also for the titanic task of evacuating hundreds of industrial enterprises to the east, which made it possible to preserve the country's production capacity. Moreover, he oversaw the supply of besieged Leningrad, and it was his department that was responsible for organizing deliveries along the ice-covered Road of Life. In these conditions, the price of a mistake was measured in hundreds of thousands of lives, and he coped with this enormous pressure. His ability to survive extended to his family. Unlike the children of many other leaders, whose fates were often tragic, Mikoyan's sons had brilliant careers, becoming test pilots, Air Force generals, and historians. He managed not only to protect them from the meat grinder of repression, but also to give them the opportunity to fulfill their potential, keeping them at a reasonable distance from the political mudslinging. His diplomatic style was unique. He could start a conversation with a Western ambassador by discussing the merits of Armenian cognac and end it with tough bargaining over grain prices. This ability to combine Eastern charm with Western business acumen disarmed his opponents. Therefore, his legacy is not only a story of political survival, it is the story of an effective crisis manager who, in the harshest conditions of a totalitarian system, managed to build, trade, and negotiate, leaving behind not only execution lists, but also factories, trade routes, and even the taste of that very plombier ice cream from his childhood. Anastas Mikoyan was able to hold on to power thanks to a combination of political adaptation, usefulness as a specialist, and the ability to choose the right moments to support or retreat. His story is a lesson in survival in conditions of constant change.